5.
Curry hits a three.
4.
Houston with a drive. Deep left field.
3.
Patrick hit by Watt. Sack number 10.
2.
Messi with a record-breaking goal.
1.
Welcome to BSS Sports. Now, here are your hosts, Steve and Trevor.
This is another edition of BSS Sports. My name is Steven Schill with the ever-lovely Monsieur Trevor Struthers. Oh, Toronto. I don't even know what to say. I simply do not know what to say. You go through an entire game, you outplay Seattle in every single regard. There's not a category that Seattle was leading. Yet the game gets decided in a shootout, and the captain has probably the worst penalty kick almost in history, if not MLS history, the entirety of soccer's history. And then Luke Moore bars it. Fantastic, right up the middle, just bars it, would have been in. And now we're left with Seattle being the champions and Toronto having to look ahead to the future. And I don't know what to think with this one. I just simply don't know what to think. Sebastian Giovinco has been pretty much irrelevant, at least in the scoring department for the last little bit of the playoffs. I mean, throughout the season, he's the main guy that got us there. Armando Cooper, a great pickup midway through the season, but again, in the playoffs, didn't really do a whole lot until Sias Ricketts coming through, seeming to, be dominant when he's on the pitch, even though he missed the goal by an inch in the regular time, or extra time, I don't even remember. It's all blurry to me. I'm just not impressed with this. Trevor, if you're Toronto, what do you do? Do you keep the same players? You're paying them a decent amount of money. Michael Bradley, probably the best player of the game, but he's the one that messes up the penalty. Sebastian Giovinco does get pulled before the game is over. However, that was due to him asking to be pulled. It wasn't Craig Vanny's decision to get pulled. He wanted to, and that's coming from Gareth Wheeler, who is Mr. TFC on the radio. But I don't know, just what do you do if you're Toronto next season? Because you were basically all in this one.
I think you kind of have to stay with where you are right now if you're TFC. Keep as many guys as you can because they just went to the championship and we're the better team up until penalties. Throughout that entire game, they were the better team. Seattle didn't even have a shot on goal, and they ended up winning the MLS Cup. So, penalty kicks are flawed, by the way, in that aspect, I suppose, when you look at it. It's like they didn't have a shot on goal the entire game, but they end up winning the championship because they won on penalties. But it's sort of the same. I get why penalties, too, they're mended to the history of soccer. But with that being said, we don't see Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final being decided in a shootout. Even though a lot of people consider the hockey shootout more of a gimmick, it's sort of along the lines of the same thing. But if you're TFC, you want to try to keep as much of that core together as you can. Keep in mind everybody's going to be a year older, but if nobody's pushing, retirement age, then they should be fine next year. And it all depends on performance. Maybe they got a lot of guys this year that performed over their head and can't live up to it. You also need to try to look at improving it any way you can.
One thing with the MLS Cup Final is they brought up James Duthie talked with the MLS commissioner before the game and was asking about, why isn't the season pushed up further with the whole, half the teams play in winter, essentially, for this final, apart from a few. Why is it that they have to play in winter? And he said, it's just, it only happened with some of the teams and kind of pushed it aside. But, does winter play a part in it? Because I know in the football, the NFL, it doesn't, people are used to it per se, but I don't know if a soccer ball per se is different when it's freezing cold outside, -10 and the blistering cold, and a Canadian winter night that Toronto lost. Still bitter about, nonetheless. But does it matter if it's played in winter or not?
Well, something you have to think about, too, is where are these leagues getting their players from and what climates are they used to? And in soccer, with American football, with the NFL, you have a lot of guys that are from America and in some cases the northern states where it can get a little colder and you can deal with snow. But in the case of soccer players, you're dealing with people that could be coming over from Europe, and I don't necessarily know how the weather depends on that. but I mean places like Australia potentially, like you get guys from all over the place. And I mean, some climates are warmer than others. I mean, but there's also some Canadians that play in the MLS. So I mean, those guys there would be kind of feeling maybe a little out of it if they didn't have a game with it being like below 0 late in the season. So I don't know really if you can find a nice middle ground. But I mean, you want to try to make it so if the MLS Cup is played in a place like Toronto, you don't have to deal with snow. So that's something you want to try to avoid. But I don't know if you can avoid the cold just because it's that time of year. And I mean, if the game's going to be played in Canada, we could get below freezing temperatures in early November sometimes. So it kind of like wavers back and forth in that aspect. It's hard to judge weather.
I'm just torn about this Toronto game. It's Stephen Fry, the former TFC goalkeeper, the one that prevents Toronto from capturing the championship. It's a story written in the stars, per se. Now, you talked about the NFL players and how most of them are from America and whatnot, which they are. But this past weekend, I don't know what it was, but this entire football weekend and Thursday, so many things happened. I mean, Matthew Stafford coming out with basically a broken hand, wearing a glove, still performing fine. Ryan Tannehill throwing the worst pass in NFL history, and then tore his ACL. And then Aqib Talib decides to beat the crap out of a guy that gave a cheap shot to his own man. And there was just this constant... Well, I mean, the Browns lost too, but I mean, I guess that's not really that interesting at this point.
I mean, you're leaving one big injury off the table here that kind of ruined me this past weekend. Melvin Gordon got hurt too, man. I mean, my fantasy team... I want to say that's the only reason you won against me this week was because Melvin Gordon ended up getting hurt. Only got me like half a point. He had like 5 rushing yards, then got hurt. The good news is hopefully he could be back for the playoffs. So it does for the fantasy playoffs. So it seems like it won't be that long term of an injury. I hope he ends up playing next week. But it's something that
okay, Trevor. All about your fantasy team.
I'm but sorry, I mean, hey, Melvin Gordon's having a tremendous season, and if it ended due to an injury like that, he had to be carted off the field. If it ended due to injury, that would be a heartbreaker.
Now, the real heartbreaker is the Cowboys. They finally lost. But to who? The Giants again. So the Giants apparently have the Dallas Cowboys number. But the thing that's more concerning about this is going back to Mr. Tony Romo. Not everybody, but there's those select individuals, as always, that are wanting Tony Romo to come back now that Dak Prescott finally lost a game. I find this kind of stupid, but what's your take on it?
They're the best team in the NFL. Why would you change the starting quarterback? I mean, that's what it comes down to. Like, so what if they had a loss? I mean, it's hard to run the table undefeated. Ask the Patriots, who did that in the regular season and lost in the Super Bowl. I mean, it's incredibly tough to do, so you're going to lose a couple of games. The fact that they lost to the Giants again, I mean, maybe if they ran into the Giants somewhere else down the road in, like, the playoffs, then maybe you could consider something like that. But, I mean, the fact that he's only lost twice this season, the fact that we just finished Week 14, or are about to finish after the game tonight, Week 14, and he only has those 2 losses, and they're to the same team. You got to keep riding Dak Prescott.
Okay, I want to talk about the Cleveland Browns for a minute. I agree with you, Dak Prescott. You got to keep with him. I mean, if you lose another 4 games in a row, okay, then I mean you got something to worry about. But with that being said, the Cleveland Browns, they decide to get Robert Griffin III back, uses him as their quarterback. Goes 12 for 28, 104 yards passing, which is brutal. And I mean, you're facing the Bengals, and look, they're all right defensively, but they're 5-7-1. So I mean, it's no. Okay, Cleveland's 0-13, so you're not expecting a whole heck of a lot. But that just seems like an awful showing from Robert Griffin. I wasn't able to watch this game because I was watching the Miami game with Tannehill doing whatever the heck he's doing. But that's awful numbers for a guy that's, was what he was when he first came into the league. It doesn't matter who you are. Any quarterback that's throwing up 104 yards against the Bengals, you got problems. What are they going to do? Are they going to try to keep with this Robert Griffin thing, or is there nobody around? Because, I mean, now we got Pac-Man Jones saying, Tyrell Pryor, what a loser, what a nerd, he's garbage and all this, and I'm confused what's going on.
Yeah, well, Pac-Man's his own little species, but in the case of the Browns, I think they're happy that they have a quarterback that had some promise. I think all that promise is pretty much out the window at this point when you look at the whole spectrum of things. But it's a guy that has a potential to turn into something still, in Robert Griffin III. when I look at the Browns' problems, I don't know if this is entirely it. I mean, definitely have to look at their performance on field, but also their play calling sometimes is a little iffy. I mean, it was just yesterday they tried a flea flicker play from the end zone that turned into a pick at about midfield. So, it's decisions like that hurt the Browns, but then also their ability to not go out and execute. So, the whole Browns organization is a big mess right now. So I don't even know where you start in terms of wanting to fix it.
I'm pretty sure that I saw last year that the Cleveland Browns defense was the highest paid in the league, and I don't know if there's much behind that, but if it's true, that's a problem. That's a severe problem.
Well, even if you look at Cleveland's offense, I mean, who are their weapons?
Tyrell Pryor,
if you can find them. And then but aside from that, they don't really have much of a running game, and they're relying on a quarterback that's been a bust in his NFL career.
Okay, you brought up bust, and so you brought me to this, and I'm sorry, but I had to do this. Colin Kaepernick. We've gone through half the year with him not playing due to wanting to take a knee, and now he's back playing. And, I mean, he did all right with the Jets. I mean, they still lost 23-17. They're still like 1-13 or 1-12, which is awful. And now apparently he's going to back out of his contract. Do you think there's a home for Colin Kaepernick? And don't you dare say the Browns.
Maybe. If they do want to give up on this RG3 experiment that they're doing. I heard Miami might need a quarterback for the rest of the season if Tannehill's done and they still want to try to contend for the playoffs. But, apart from that, I don't know if there's a home for Colin Kaepernick. I mean, for a guy to be doing what he's doing, playing he's not a superstar quarterback, even though he did build some momentum behind him once upon a time. But for him to be battling all these social issues at a time where a lot of people just wanted to shut up, go and play, and earn the respect on the field and earn his job on the field, for him to be doing the social issues, it's not helping his value in the market. So, I don't know where you look, but quarterbacks, they're tough to find in a lot of places. Ask Cleveland. Quarterbacks are hard to find. Even ask LA. Another team that's struggling to have a good starting quarterback. Not that they're looking at the playoffs anytime soon, but especially with Jeff Fisher, but that's a different story.
You bring up a good point, because when you're thinking about quarterbacks and how they're so not easily accessible, if Dak Prescott keeps this up, then Tony Romo is technically available. And you can say what you want about Tony, but he's pretty decent. And all this talks about the Bills going for him, but they have Tyrod Taylor, which is going to start a whole another wave of confusion. But do you think that Dallas would trade Romo under any circumstances this year or next?
I don't think there's any chance that they would trade him this year. If you consider the fact that Dak Prescott is still a rookie, you really don't know what you have for sure with Dak until he's got some time under his belt. With that being said, Tony Romo, that's a lot of money that you're paying that guy to sit on the bench. Now, I'm sure Dak's not making a lot right now. That's going to change in the future. So by that time, you have to make your decision. But it's not going to happen this year. And, at the very least, if you're Dallas, you're going to the playoffs. You have that safety net in Tony Romo in case Dak Prescott turns into a pumpkin come playoff time. So right now they have some extra bullets in the pack, I guess. I just invented a new saying. But they know what they have, and it's hard not to like it if you're Dallas. There's a lot of guys that don't like Tony Romo. That's a pretty good backup quarterback, though, when you're going into the playoffs.
Question for you, Mr. Trevor. Who do you think's the best team in the NFL right now?
It's a good question. Dallas has to be in the conversation. There's no doubt about it. But, if there's a team that I really like when it comes to different weapons, Dallas fits this mold as well when you have Dak performing well and Ezekiel Elliott performing well, but those are two rookies. The only one that's not a rookie is that's following the same mold would be Des Bryant, who had a horrible game yesterday. He was negative fantasy points for maybe one of the few times in his career, if ever. So, but the mold that I'm talking about is I really like the offensive mold that Pittsburgh has going on when you consider, and you want to talk about fantasy games. Le'Veon Bell had almost 50 points in fantasy in standard leagues. Just just the other day. I mean, I want to see what that would be like in PPR, because I mean, you know about Le'Veon Bell, obviously, is you can throw to that guy as well. You can do a lot of different things with Le'Veon Bell. So he probably had some receptions in there, obviously contributing to what he did. But that's arguably the best running back in the game. Antonio Brown is a 99 rating in Madden for a reason, He's not a nobody, and he's another weapon. And Ben Roethlisberger is a pretty solid rock as quarterback. So it's hard not to like what Pittsburgh has going offensively. It's just defensively is where they worry me a bit.
That's it for this edition of BSS Sports. Make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at BSS Sports, archiving all of our works on YouTube at BSS Productions. For Trevor Struthers and myself, Steven Schill, we'll catch you next Monday.